Ever feel like you're just drowning in information these days?
Hmm.
Articles and books and videos. It's like impossible to keep up with it all.
Yeah.
But what if you could, like, take a shortcut to understanding how our minds work? Like
Ooh,
how we make decisions and like why we sometimes make these predictable mistakes.
it'd be great, right?
Well, you're in the right place. Today we're diving deep into the world of cognitive biases.
And to guide us through this fascinating landscape, we're turning to Daniel Kahneman and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Ooh, a classic.
We've got some excerpts from the audiobook that really bring these concepts to life.
Awesome. Think of it as like a user's manual for your own brain.
Yeah.
We'll explore the two systems that like drive our thinking.
Hmm.
The mental shortcuts that can either help us or lead us astray,
Right.
and what we can do to become more aware and like discerning thinkers.
I think the beauty of Kahneman's work is that it reveals these hidden patterns in our thinking.
Yeah.
These predictable errors in judgment that we all make, often without even realizing it.
Okay, let's unpack this. So Kahneman starts with this like brilliant idea. We have these two thinking systems, almost like two different characters inside our heads.
Yeah.
He calls them System 1 and System 2.
System 1 is the fast thinker, the one that operates on autopilot based on intuition, instinct, and emotion.
So it's that like gut reaction.
It's the system that helps us dodge a ball, read facial expressions, or make those split-second decisions when we don't have time to think things through.
Yeah. Sometimes it's spot on, sometimes it's hilariously wrong, but it's always there, ready to jump in.
Exactly. And that's where System 2 comes in. System 2 is the slower, more deliberate thinker. It's the one that weighs evidence, analyzes arguments, and tries to keep those impulsive System 1 urges in check.
So it's the voice of reason, the one that says, hold on a second, let's think this through.
Precisely. But here's the catch. System 2 is also lazy. It takes effort to engage it, and we often let System 1 call the shots without even realizing it.
Yeah. It's like having a brilliant detective, System 2, paired with an overeager, jump-to-conclusions sidekick, System 1.
A perfect analogy. And just like with any good detective story, things get interesting when we start to see how these two systems interact and where things can go wrong.
And Kahneman gives some really memorable examples in the audiobook that really highlight these concepts.
One that stands out is the bananas and vomit experiment. Just hearing those two words together triggers an immediate visceral reaction, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's a bit unpleasant.
Suddenly, I'm not so hungry for that banana I was about to eat.
Exactly. That's System 1 in action. Making lightning-fast connections, creating a narrative before you even have time to consciously process what you're hearing.
It highlights the sheer power and speed of our intuitive system.
Right.
It's like our brains are saying, danger, possible contamination, abort mission.
Right. And speaking of jumping to conclusions, there's that classic example of the Moses illusion. Kahneman asks, how many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark?
I've heard this one. Most people answer 2 without missing a beat. But wait, it was Noah, not Moses, who built the ark.
Exactly. But because the question fits a familiar pattern, our minds just glide right over the error.
Oh, wow.
Kahneman calls this norm theory, where our brains constantly check for consistency with what we already believe, often at the expense of accuracy.
Interesting. It's like our brains are on autopilot, saying, yep, sounds about right, moving on, without bothering to double check.
Precisely. Another great illustration is the bat and ball problem.
Oh, yeah.
It's a simple math puzzle that reveals just how easily we jump to conclusions, even when the stakes are low.
The one where a bat and a ball cost $1 more than the ball.
Mm.
I remember falling for that one. Instinctively, you want to say the ball cost 10 cents.
Right. But if you stop and do the math, you quickly realize the ball actually costs 5 cents. It's almost embarrassing how easy it is to fall for such a simple trick.
Yeah. It just goes to show that even when we think we're being logical, our System 1 is often lurking in the background, ready to trip us up.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. From here, Kahneman dives deeper into specific heuristics and biases, those mental shortcuts that can either make our lives easier or lead to predictable errors in judgment.
So let's dive into some of those, shall we? All right, let's talk about some of these mental shortcuts, these like heuristics and biases that Kahneman lays out.
He explains so many.
I know. I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Well, let's start with the availability heuristic. This is where we judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily examples come to mind.
Okay, so like after seeing a news story about, I don't know, like a plane crash, you suddenly feel like flying is super dangerous.
Right.
Even though statistically it's still like one of the safest ways to travel.
Exactly. The vividness of that recent event distorts your perception of the actual risk. And it works the other way, too. Like, if you haven't heard about any plane crashes lately, you might feel overly confident about air travel.
It's like our brains are saying, if I can easily recall it, it must be important.
Yeah.
And probably more common than it actually is.
Right. Another fascinating one is the representativeness heuristic. This is where we judge probabilities based on how well something fits a stereotype,
Okay.
often ignoring the actual statistical likelihood.
Oh, I remember Kahneman's example of Tom W. in the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
You're given a description of this, like, nerdy, introverted guy
Mm-hmm.
and asked to guess his field of study. And most people assume he must be a computer science major because he fits the stereotype.
Precisely. Even though statistically there are far more students in other fields like humanities or social sciences,
Right.
we tend to overemphasize how well something matches our preconceived notions.
Yeah. It's like we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes, forcing people into categories even when they don't quite belong.
Now, get ready for this one, the anchoring effect. This one is so sneaky because it shows how irrelevant information can sway our judgments.
You mean like that experiment with the Wheel of Fortune,
Hmm.
where people spun a wheel that landed on either 10 or 65, and then were asked to guess the percentage of African nations in the UN?
That's the one. The people who spun a 10 guessed way lower than those who spun a 65.
Why?
Even though the wheel spin had absolutely nothing to do with the actual answer.
It's like that random number just got stuck in their heads and influenced their subsequent judgments.
And this happens all the time in everyday life.
Yeah.
Think about negotiations. Like if someone throws out a ridiculously high starting price,
Uh-huh.
it can anchor your perception of what's reasonable, even if you know it's inflated.
Yeah.
Oh.
So being aware of these biases is the first step to, like, counteracting them, right?
Absolutely.
But how do we actually catch ourselves in the act? It's like trying to see your own blind spots.
It's a constant process of self-reflection and awareness, but knowing about these biases gives you a framework for questioning your own assumptions.
Okay, so if I find myself making a snap judgment about someone,
Yate.
I can ask myself, wait, am I falling for the representativeness heuristic here? Am I letting a stereotype cloud my judgment?
Exactly. Or if you're feeling overly anxious about a certain risk, you can ask, is the availability heuristic at play here? Am I being swayed by a recent news story or a vivid image, even if the actual probability is low?
It's like having a mental checklist, a set of tools to help us become more aware of those moments when our intuition might be leading us astray.
Now let's talk about a bias that often feels counterintuitive but has profound implications. Regression to the mean.
I remember this one from the book. It's the idea that extreme performance, whether good or bad, tends to regress towards the average over time, right?
Exactly. Kahneman uses the example of evaluating employee performance. Let's say you have two employees, Jane and Kim. Jane consistently delivers solid performance, while Kim has one stellar year.
Yeah.
Then her performance drops back down.
So even though Kim had that amazing year, it's likely her performance was influenced by some lucky breaks or external factors that aren't likely to repeat.
Precisely. Regression to the mean suggests we should be cautious about over-rewarding or over-punishing based on those extreme performances because they often don't reflect the true underlying ability.
So it's a reminder to look for that long-term consistency, not just get caught up in those peaks and valleys.
And this applies to so much more than just employee performance.
Oh, yeah.
Think about athletes, investors, even our own self-evaluations. We need to be mindful that those outlier events don't always indicate a lasting trend.
That's a great point. So with all this knowledge about biases and heuristics,
Yeah.
like, what do we do? How do we apply this to our lives? Yeah, like knowing about them is one thing,
Right.
but like actually using that knowledge in real life,
Yeah.
that's a whole other challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I think it all starts with awareness.
Okay.
Just being conscious of these potential pitfalls can help us make more informed choices.
So it's like having a heads up that our brains might try to pull a fast one on us.
Exactly. And once you know the tricks your mind might play, you can start to question your own assumptions.
Okay.
You know, if you find yourself making a snap judgment about someone based on a stereotype,
Mm-hmm.
you can pause and say, wait a minute, am I falling for the representativeness heuristic here?
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's like having a little mental checklist.
Yeah.
Okay, am I letting the availability heuristic cloud my judgment? Or is this a situation where anchoring might be skewing my thinking?
Precisely. The more you practice, the better you become at recognizing those patterns and engaging that slower, more deliberate system 2 thinking.
So it's not about becoming some kind of superhuman decision maker,
No?
but more about just being aware of our limitations
Right.
and developing strategies to compensate for them.
Right. Think of it like an athlete working with a coach to identify and improve weak areas.
Yeah, yeah.
We can all benefit from having tools and techniques to help us overcome those mental blind spots.
It's almost like having a secret weapon in our decision-making arsenal.
Absolutely. It empowers you to be a more critical thinker, question assumptions, and make more informed choices.
That's awesome.
And ultimately, that's what this deep dive is all about, helping you become a more confident and discerning navigator of your own mind.
So where do we go from here? This world of cognitive biases is so fascinating.
Right.
There's so much more to explore.
Oh, there's a lifetime of exploration ahead.
I know.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
But the important thing is you've started the journey. You've taken a peek behind the curtain of your own mind.
That's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah, it is.
Now here's something to ponder as you go about your day. If we can become so aware of our own biases, how can we use that knowledge to better understand the behavior of others?
Oh, that's a good one.
Food for thought, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Keep those mental gears turning. And until next time, happy thinking.
Until next time.